So when we went up to put our luggage in there, and then we were walking down together, and we get really close to the water's edge where the hippos were, and all I see is this hippo jump up, and it scared the living daylights out of me. I ran. I started just running. I wouldn't look. I mean, it was very dark, and I wasn't really able to see where I was running or even look where I was running. And I ran right into a bush, fell down. I was waiting for that hippo to just come up and nail me, and then I heard a splash in the water. And sure enough, the hippo actually ran the other direction when I thought it was running towards us. And boy, did I get made fun of for that.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, welcome back into another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. Thank you for being here. I'm your host, Bill Ream, as always. Have another fantastic guest, our second ever repeat guest on the podcast, one of my favorite episodes of 2025 and one of my very early episodes of 2025. I have a returning author, therapist, dare I say friend. Dr. Chad Scott is back on the podcast. If you would be so kind, welcome back, Chad. And would you please let the listeners know or remind them, for those who haven't listened in a while or haven't heard you in a while, who are you?
Well, Bill, I am a friend, by the way. It's been great getting to know you this past year. Excited to be a return guest on your podcast. What am I? I have been a mental health. I've been in the mental health field for the past 26 years. And last year wrote a book, and I think our podcast was just before it came out. And after it came out, it hit some critically acclaimed status, I would suppose, and had some really good critical reviews and won some awards. Probably the coolest was the non-obvious book awards. I didn't apply to this or anything. They just took what they thought were the 100 best nonfiction books of the year. Especially they gave a little extra emphasis on books that are just not obvious. It's the non-obvious company, so they look at things that are innovative and kind of look at things from a different angle. And they thought they're is one of the 100 best books of the year. So that was really, really cool to and humbling to be on that list.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And so what was your book and what was it about? I have a copy I'm looking at right now. I'm not reading it as we speak, but I'm looking at it right now. But tell everyone what it is and what it's about. And that was, if you listened to the first episode, obviously, you know pretty much what it's about, because it's a lot of what you've been doing in your travels for the last how long. But I'll let you can tell better than I can.
Yeah, so it is called Beyond the Darkness, Transformative Journeys Through Dark Tourism. And I don't want to scare people off by the dark tourism label. So the way I got into that was I've always been a traveler, and I seemed to always have an interest in history and just kind of off the beaten path types of places. And I went through a lot of my own darkness. I ended up having liver disease about 4 or 5 years ago, and ended up having a liver transplant just over 2 years ago. And coming out of that liver transplant, I really found that going to a lot of these historically dark places, which dark tourism encompasses a lot of historically dark places like Auschwitz and Hiroshima and the Paris catacombs and cemeteries and things like that. I'd always find myself in places like that. But I was finding that when I was going through my own dark times, that those places really came back and helped me through those times and gave me ideas on how to cope with my own suffering. And so my book is really about, it's a memoir, it's a travel memoir going through about 75 historically dark places around the world, and how those spoke to me and how I use them in my own life. When I went through these places with a lot of reverence and empathy, that's when I think they really came back to help me. And also you feel a little bit like you're helping their memory live on through you, which is all things that my book talks about.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I was gonna ask you, and you touched on it, but if there's any way possible to expand a little bit, just because of my own curiosity,
Mhm,
like I understand the connection with you went through a lot. I mean, you had
mhm,
a near death experience, not near death as in like a bear coming to eat your head or something. You know what I mean? Like not like a shark
mhm,
attack or something like
yeah,
that, but you were close enough that it could have killed you. And
mhm.
so, but what do you think about is do you think it's like because you kind of put yourself in a certain state? Because not everybody who, even if they maybe went through something like that, would go to visit a place and necessarily feel the same thing. So, could you expand it all on why you think that actually was sort of therapeutic for you or has
Well,
been?
I think, okay, so if you go in with a certain intention, and that's what I advocate for, is not going in with the tourist mentality, just going in more to honor their suffering. And when you go in to honor their suffering and to learn from their suffering, and that's what I say is you have to go in with a lot of reverence for what happened there and the suffering of those people that suffered in these places or died, or going into a cemetery, it's like, they didn't necessarily suffer. But, for example, going in and standing outside of Marilyn Monroe's, grave. Yeah, she was a celebrity and things like that, but she also had a lot of suffering in her life. And Hugh Hefner is buried, or entombed right next to her. And you think about the significance of those, and they don't necessarily always come back to uh, they don't always guide you through a hard time in your life necessarily, but it seems like they collectively, when you have these experiences, really can be a catalyst to help you through hard times, especially when you do go to more of the darker types of places. For example, I've been to some, relatively dark places in the last few months, even. I was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I went through part of the reason I went there is I went to the Recoleta Cemetery, which is one of the world's most beautiful cemeteries. They're all these above ground mausoleums. It's basically a city of the dead, and it's where Eva Peron, Evita, is buried. And her story, if you really learn about her, she died at a young age. Guided her country through a really hard time. She wasn't the vice president, but she was basically like a vice president for her husband. And sh and her body was stolen at one time and brought to Italy, and, so there's just so much to this backstory. And she was, an advocate for the working class and things like that, and that really upset the higher class. And, is that so there's a lot to her story. And, um but going and sitting outside her mausoleum, and it's pretty humble compared to what her life was. And, um, just sitting out there helps you, reflect on it. It made me want to advocate for, women's rights or the working class, and, you know, things that she advocated for because she felt so strongly. So again, going in with that reverence and empathy to places, you tend to, um, a little mirror emerges, and you see little pieces of yourself. You can see little pieces of yourself in Ava Peron. You can see little pieces of yourself. This sounds almost, I don't know, kind of, I'm losing the word, but for example, going through the gas chamber at Auschwitz, you see little pieces of yourself. No, I've never experienced something as horrible as that. Another place in Argentina that was really profound was oh gosh, tell me, it was a place where they they had a time during this called the Dirty War where they would take people, just kidnap them off the street, and they would just disappear. And they would bring them to this place which is really in plain sight, but they didn't know that they were bringing them in just this military compound in Buenos Aires. And they would, after a while, they would just take them in airplanes and throw them out into the sea, and alive. And they would drown in the middle of the sea or die when they hit the water. And you know, it just is heart-wrenching, but there's also people that, survive that time, or, the families and things like that. Again, when you know that other people suffered in such horrific ways, again, you can see little pieces of yourself walking through there. And, when it's not necessarily you're comparing your suffering to theirs, but knowing that the strength of some people, and, how they helped each other get through those times, and how they communicated. And, so you almost feel like you get power from those types of things. It's not going in there and like, oh gosh, getting off on this gore and horror. And, I'm sure some people do that. I mean, without a doubt, some people do that. But reflecting on that other people's suffering, you know, it reminds me almost of religion in a way where, um, almost all religions, all the major world religions, they look at suffering as this almost this next level
Of
of religion,
holiness or
of holiness. Yeah,
spiritualness. Or, yeah.
exactly. Because people that can withstand suffering tend to be, very strong. And, you know, looking at world leaders, some of the people that have changed the world the most, a lot of them had a lot of suffering in their own lives, because you almost need to have this suffering to be able to, hit that next gear of being a human being. And you can learn a lot from other people's suffering, I guess is my point.
Sure. And going through the suffering can help develop compassion as well for
Mhm.
others who are suffering because you've already endured it. So
Yeah, and
that's
that's where that empathy part comes in, is, when you empathize. And I know this from being a therapist, is like I empathize a lot every day with other people suffering, because they're coming in for therapy, talking about their suffering. And you really learn from that. As long as you don't let it get you down, because you could go in there and be like, you know, and only focus on how horrible it is. And it is horrible. Most of these places are awful, but focusing on, people's strengths and resilience, and again, how they were able to help each other through those times, is the stuff that really can be miraculous in your own life by reflecting on that.
could you say, because I don't want to say would you say, but could you say that many of these places, if you understand the maybe not individual people's stories, but understanding, maybe what some people did for others during these trying times or whatever, like it almost makes it, even though it's horrible and what happened were brutal and
Mhm.
terrifying, but it's almost beautiful in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there, and it's sounds awkward to say, but there is some level of beauty in suffering because of those types of things. If we just only focus on the pain and awfulness, yeah, but it is again awful. But a lot of people risk their lives to help other people. And you know, or or they may have said, it was me when it was somebody else, and then so they're the ones that are executed, or
Hmm.
those types of things.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I definitely think people should pick up the book if you haven't already. But before we get into, we'll do the same thing we did the first time. Where can people find the book? Where can they find you? Website, socials, any of that stuff?
Yeah, drchadscott.com is my website, and there's links to where you can get the book. The book is really available, whether it's paper book, audio book, it's also a Kindle, pretty much anywhere online. Since it's been out, it's really not in too many bookstores anymore, but you can get it anywhere online.
Fantastic.
Yep, and Dr. Chad Scott, I believe, is my Facebook social.
Nice. And I wish that I had known you prior. I would have bought drchadscott.com first and then, charged you out the wazoo to buy those rights back from me. We've gone over before, but maybe in a nutshell, just to kind of, for anyone who maybe didn't listen to our first episode together, how did travel become a thing in your life? Was it something when you were young that started with your family, or was it something that developed over time?
It sure did start with my family. We traveled a lot around the country to visit relatives when I was a kid. And when I became an adult, I did a lot of traveling, whether it would be with girlfriends or when I got married, my wife. And then after my divorce, I started really traveling solo around the world a lot, partially as a way to cope with a divorce. And that's what really where kind of I feel like my travel writing is starting to actually curve into is more not necessarily dark tourism, but how travel where you need to go to the right place kind of at the right time in your life, and not necessarily traveling just for pleasure, but for experiences and meaning, especially meaning. And that's really I feel like what I had did. For example, I was diagnosed with liver cancer, which ended up being a inaccurate diagnosis. But I thought I had liver cancer for 9 months. I my faith wasn't all that strong, and it's like, "Oh, shoot, I better get some religion here in a hurry just in case." And that's when I went to Jerusalem. When I just needed to relax, that is when I went to the beach. When I didn't have a lot of hard times going on in my life, the beach is just fine. And then when I was suffering with liver disease, that's when I went to Auschwitz. And so um, finding you the right place at the right time, I think, is really important if you want to, uh, and especially right now in the United States and around the world, there's a lot of uncertainty and stress. And I think there is a trend. I was actually interviewed a few months back by a company. I'm escaping off the top of my head, but they do future, companies pay them to kind of predict the future. They're really good at like trends, finding out what the big trends are. And they interviewed me about dark tourism, but they talked about how people are starting to travel more for meaning than just for pure, pleasure and relaxation.
Yeah, I could see that absolutely. And travel obviously, and I think we all know this. Those of us who have traveled, and especially if you have gone through something and then traveled, it can be very healing. It can be life altering, and in many different ways and different aspects. But I would agree with that 1,000%. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in, Dr. Chad, and I'll ask the question I always ask, but I'm gonna ask a little differently for you. So I'll
Sure.
just ask you, Chad Scott, since we last spoke, where have you been?
Yeah, in the last 9 months, have had a great travel I've had a great travel year. So since I had talked to you, I went on a big thing too that I like is trying to live out your childhood dreams in your adulthood. And one thing I've always wanted to do was go on a safari. And this was the year that I got to go on a safari. So I had went to Nairobi, Kenya, and went into the Masai Mara, and then traveled to Tanzania and went through the Serengeti. So that was, I don't even know if that was the highlight of my travel year because I had another great trip. So after that, I had went to Mesa to visit some relatives, and I did a podcast down there actually during that time. And then I went to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and that's where I went to that Recoleta big. Probably the main reason I went there was the Recoleta Cemetery. But and oftentimes what you get out of these places are so much more than what you think. So I went there for that cemetery, and then also to go to the ESMA dirty war place where the people that disappeared and were tortured, and then things like, I was kind of doing a dark tourism trip, and it ended up, I mean, I got so much more out of that, and I hope to get into that today. And then after that, I went and relived another, I wouldn't say a childhood dream, but I loved anthropology when I was in college, and I always wanted to go to Machu Picchu, and I went to Machu Picchu, and it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, if not the most beautiful place I've ever been in. And that wasn't even necessarily the reason I went there. It was more to learn about the culture and things, and the Inca history and stuff. But oh my God, you get up there in the morning, and there's this eerie, beautiful haze from the clouds, and as the day goes on, that sort of disappears, and then the clouds just start floating through randomly as you're looking down at it. It's just one of the most beautiful places a person could go, and it's kind of cool because it's a bit of a trip to get there. You have to take buses and trains, and yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, unless you're one of those insanely fit individuals that hike for miles.
Yeah, and that I am
And
not. No, 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 no.
yeah, how did you like the bus ride up and down? It was crazy.
Yeah, so you've been there?
Yes, sir. We talked before you went. I believe I'm the one who suggested to go in the afternoon and then go in the morning.
Yeah, okay, so yes, and that's exactly what I did.
Hmm.
Yeah, so thank you for that advice. So
Yes,
I
sir.
actually, yeah, I went in and did the bus ride was, um I mean, because you go there and you're really not I mean, you don't know what to expect, and, yeah, you go up there and I think we left at about 6 in the morning from that little town there, and oh, now yeah, because we were talking about the town, but, yeah, the switchbacks, you're going and seeing these clouds floating through, and it's like, "What in the world?" What is Machu Picchu gonna look like if just the bus ride is amazing? And it's a little scary, yeah. I mean, you're you're way up there in the mountains with these giant buses on these tiny roads, but the
Yeah,
train, I mean, the
and they don't go slow.
no, no.
And yeah, it's literally because it's so steep that it's literally, zigzag, zigzag, zigzag,
Yeah.
and you keep watching the town below get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah. Yeah.
It, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
since I mean, so was that the most recent place that you went to?
well, Mesa, Arizona's was that the yeah, no, actually Argentina, yeah, Peru was the most recent. Yep.
So I mean, I don't know. Since we're on there, do you want to start there, or would you rather start with kind of where we left off? It doesn't matter to me either way.
Well, we could talk about Nairobi and
Yeah,
go
because
from there.
and I don't know because and I do friends I follow you on Facebook. I try to
Mhm.
kind of pay attention to when you're posting some photos and
Sure.
throw some little likes and stuff on there. Um, Maybe a comment once in a while, but I don't know that I remember seeing a lot of photos from Nairobi, and so or if we even talked about that. So I'm very interested to hear what your experience was like there.
Yeah, so Nairobi, Kenya. I got there a day before my safari started. So I took a side tour, me and another gal from I just randomly kind of met at breakfast one morning, and we ended up hiring some people to bring us around Nairobi. And that is quite the experience. I would say it's kind of a chaotic city. You're definitely in the minority being Caucasian there, which for me it's not a common thing. When you go to Europe, or I guess the other time I felt that way was in Japan. And but anyway, it's a modern city, but I would say it's pretty gritty and energetic. The level of poverty there, I don't wanna call it a culture shock, because I know, I mean, from traveling all over, I've seen a lot of poverty, but, not necessarily, just the tin shed ghettos, I guess, is kinda what they look like. They're just massive, and then you turn the corners, and then you see a tribal person walking their goats down the road, and, like, Maasai warrior or whatever. And, and then you go through a couple more corners, and then there's like a giraffe preserve there where they rehabilitate giraffes, and you can go in there and feed them. And kind of the oddest thing about that was you're driving through the city looking at the government buildings and things. And I took out my camera, and and I kind of got scolded, like, don't take a picture of the parliament, or don't take a picture, and also, I tried taking a picture of the railroad station, so it's like I wasn't even sure what I could and couldn't take pictures of. And then you see the police officers down there. I don't know what the name of these are, but they're holding these really long, sticks, where they don't necessarily have guns, but they have these long sticks, and they'll, apparently, I luckily didn't see anybody getting hit with them, but if the people are acting up, they can, the police just hit people with sticks. So I don't know, maybe that's not any different than what, police in the States use. They just, oh, gosh, I can't think of the name, Billy Club or whatever. But yeah, so then, later on, we met our group that we're gonna go on safari with. It was just shy of a 2-week safari, and we really put on some miles in this.
Did you
It's
say 2 week safari?
yeah, it was almost 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was 12 days. Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever talked to someone who did something like this that was so long. I've talked to people who have gone on
Yeah.
into these I don't know, preserves or whatever you want to call
Mhm.
these. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but and they're there for a day. Maybe they
Mhm.
go twice, two
Yeah.
days back to back, but it's not some maybe so immersive as what you experienced.
No, I figure if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. And it wasn't glamping. We pitched our tents every night, just about every night. There was a couple nights where we stayed in I guess they're kinda like hotels.
Some sort of lodging, yeah.
Yeah. And then there were a couple nights where we had optional upgrades, and I was so exhausted on the end of a couple of those days. I'm like, yeah, I'll take the optional upgrade. But I would say maybe 8 out of those nights, I pitched a tent and yeah. And I'll tell you what, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but the first night we got into the Serengeti, we start our fire and and we're in this like I would say it's a half bus, partially almost like a camp, sort of like a camper, but it's more like a bus. But when you think of a safari, you're thinking of those little safari vehicles that so if anybody wants to go on a safari and you don't want you want to experience the animals and you want to experience nature as close as you can get to it, I really think the way I did it is really good because it's probably the cheapest way too. I mean, that whole safari cost me just over $4,000, and which is nowhere near what it's going to cost somebody who goes glamping. Staying in these really nice places, which a lot of people do. So you can go to Africa on the cheap. I used frequent flyer miles, so I mean that I did that whole thing 2 weeks in Africa for probably under $5,000. And but that first night in the Serengeti, we nightness is coming. We're pretty much by ourselves.
How many of you were there?
There were 10. I was the only American. I was the only natural, English my first language. I was the only person that didn't speak multiple languages. Yeah, we had people from Japan, or not Japan, China, Germany. Oh gosh. Well, and then the guides were Kenyan, and 4 Belgians. So it was really neat. And then it was such a multicultural experience talking to them about different things. And after a few nights, they finally, were asking me about my politics and things like that, which they're very interested, considering how the United States is right now.
Yeah, they probably wanted to ask you the first night, but
Well, and actually that's what they said. And I mean, I don't know, me and you've never talked politics, so but I had mentioned something about not liking our president, and then you could almost see this, collective sigh of relief amongst everybody. They're like, "Oh my God, Chad, we really were wondering what you thought about, what's going on in the United States." And yeah, it was something. But okay, so back to that first night in the Serengeti, you could hear the Maasai drumming in the distance as night's coming, and then you hear lions roaring, you know, and now the second night though,
wait. Can I ask you a
yep,
question? So you're camping in a tent in what, a field?
yeah, basically, I mean it's the savannah, yeah.
And so technically anything could happen, but I'm sure that they know, obviously they're not going to try to put someone in harm's way. So obviously they know this is a safe-ish area, right? But
Well,
is it
no,
completely safe?
no. Okay, so I want to tell you about the second night
Okay.
though. So the
Go
so
go
the
ahead. Go
fir-
ahead.
so the first night, okay. Actually, I'll bring it back to the first night. So when we were in the Masai Mara, we were just staying right just outside the Masai Mara, and I heard one lion roar, and it's like, oh my God, did you guys hear that lion roar? And that was like the highlight of my night. And we saw some zebras near us and stuff, and like, wow, how cool! This place is so neat. And but then we got into the Serengeti, and we hear the lions roaring at night, and it went on, for a few hours, and then you heard that, just the drumming in the distance, like, oh my God, this is so cool. But there were other people. But the second night we were there, we were pretty much I mean, we were the only people there. So there's the 10 of us, and it was just really eerie. And then again, as the night goes down, as the sun goes down, we were sitting around our fire, and then we hear the drumming of the Maasai in the distance again, just that tribal drumming, which is just really cool to hear in the distance. And, it puts you into you're like, oh my God, I am really in the Serengeti. And then the lions are roaring again, and they're not far away. I mean, they're I would say a quarter of a mile away each side of us, and you're hearing these lions roaring. Like, okay, they're not that far away. But as that was going on, we look up. There's an elephant over by our tents because our fire is just a little, 20 feet away from our tents, and then on the other side of our tent was this big giant bull elephant. And like, oh my God, there's an elephant right there. And then we kind of creep around trying to get a good look at it, get pictures of it, and then we noticed that at its feet is a hyena, and it's just unreal. And earlier that day, there's a baboon like basically in our campsite, and so the elephant,
Is there any level of fear and anxiety? There has to be some.
you know, there should be, but well, I'm looking at the guides, and the guides
They're
are
not
just,
worried. Yeah.
no, they're not worried, and I mean they're very intrigued. I mean they're, but they're I felt pretty safe. I never felt unsafe while I was there.
It's like when you're going through turbulence on an airplane, you look at the stewardess or the
Yeah,
steward, and if they're fine, we're fine.
exactly. So I the elephant kind of disappeared in the background. So me and another guy were walking towards the bathroom and know that this elephant might be by, and then sure enough, it's right, not too far away from me as we're, and then it starts. I thought it was charging us, so I guess that might have been the one little whoa. And I had a video going at the time, and we ran into the bathroom quick so that before the bull elephant, but he was trotting after us, and it's like, where'd the hyena go? And yeah, it was pretty. I wouldn't say I was scared, but it was
A little intense.
realize where you're at, and that's neat. That's why you travel. That's why I wanted that experience. There's another night where I did get scared. We were in a place called Lake Navasha, and we were there to look at hippos. So that was one of the nights I upgraded. I was just exhausted, and we got there at night, and it's like, I don't want to pitch this tent at night. And then they said, well, if anybody wants to upgrade for $40, you can upgrade. So I upgraded to a little cheap little cabin, and but our cabins weren't right where our tents were. So, and we weren't allowed to walk by ourselves because of the hippos, and they wanted us to kind of have more eyes or whatever. So when we went up to put our luggage in there, and then we were walking down together, and we get really close to the water's edge where the hippos were, and all I see is this hippo jump up, and it scared the living daylights out of me. I started just running. I wouldn't look I mean, it was very dark, and I wasn't really able to see where I was running or even look where I was running. And I ran right into a bush, fell down. I was waiting for that hippo to just come up and nail me. And then I heard a splash in the water. And, sure enough, the hippo actually ran the other direction when I thought it was running towards us. And boy, did I get made fun of for that. What?
You didn't
Yeah.
squeal or anything, did you?
Yeah. Oh, no, but I mean, everybody was scared, but I was the only one that took off running like a bat out of hell, and ran right into a bush. And the next day we could see the bush and the indent that I made in the bush. Yeah. Yeah.
That's nice. I need to go now and see if it's still there.
That was worth the $5,000 right there. Who has that story,
Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah, and then we're eating, and then there's, these, I can't remember what kind of monkeys they were, but they're these beautiful black and white monkeys with long fur and, real long tails. And they're, they're jumping on top of our, I'll just call it a bus, our safari vehicle, and, looking down, trying to steal our food. And yeah, it was just such a neat experience.
Yeah, monkeys are good for that. I've found in my lifetime. If they want something, they're gonna come get it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We had
they're
monkeys
fast
around
as
us
we-
quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah, they sure are. Yeah, they're sneaky little guys.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I felt like I had another question, but go ahead. I continue. I'll think of it. Or I will.
Yeah. So what about so we went to the Mossy Mara first. Had probably saw one of the most beautiful sunsets there. I had a video, I think it's on my Instagram, and have this video where um a Maasai person was kind of getting us as close as he could to the zebra. And at the time, the sunset, just the colors in that sunset were so neat. And, and we're getting into seeing these zebras, up close. And that was basically our introduction to all the animals. That was like our first experience. And and then you'd come over, across, elephant dung and whatever. And it's like, gosh, so, tomorrow was our first day. And so we go into the Mossy Mara the next day, and, and just seeing the only rhinos we saw was the first day. And, but just seeing the rhinos, like the first lion, I was so worried that I wasn't going to see a lion. I'm like, I just really want to see a lion in the wild. And I know the first lion we saw, it had the big mane and it was laying out there. And I'm like, I squealed like a kid, like, oh my God. And I got made fun of for that even, by our tour guide. He mocked me. He said, "Oh my God." Yeah, yeah. So we saw my first lion, and probably 20 minutes later, we saw our first rhino, or our only rhinos. But yeah, and then of course you end up seeing mini lions, and by the end of the trip, you're like, "Oh, there's another lion." But it never gets old. We saw all the big five. The last one we found was a leopard. It's like getting to that last day, and we hadn't seen a leopard yet. And then there was a leopard sighting, and all the guides there, they're sort of in contact with each other, so they'll get tipped off if they see especially some of the more exotic animals. If there's a rhino or leopard, especially, they kind of stay in communication so more people can experience those. And yeah, we got to this tree that had a leopard up there, but also had about 4 or 5 baby leopards just jumping all over this tree. And we just sat there for about an hour just in awe. I mean, I guess that, one of the biggest thing of all these, I would, these big experiences, whether you go into Jerusalem or on a safari or whatever, anything that's, Machu Picchu definitely fits in that category. Seeing things and being in awe, really, I think being in awe, being a therapist, I would say every time you're in awe of something gorgeous, something beautiful, it shows you kind of, it humbles you, it lowers your ego, and I think those experiences make you better people.
Oh, I would agree 1,000%. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things about that, I think, and we've touched on this on the podcast and here and there, some of those things, it's like, it's so difficult to put those things into words. So they're so impactful for you or for us, but to be able to try to convey that or share that with someone else, sometimes it's just so difficult because you can never replicate it or paint a picture with words as hard as you might try.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the, if I do write a next book, that's kind of the angle I'm gonna try and hit at, is, when I sit and think, I can think of words. It's a lot of times when I'm sitting and just having a conversation like this, it's like, it's hard. It is hard to put into words, but when you can sit and think about the words, yeah, I think I'm hoping to be able to maybe pull that off. I don't know. But another thing too, and I probably had mentioned this, but anytime you get out of your comfort zone, you learn something. Nothing grows inside comfort zones. So if you don't leave your city or your state or whatever, and that's, and you're just real comfortable there, you're not growing, you're not really learning. And some people too is, their world might be, their house. I mean, I've worked with clients that, getting them out of their house is getting them out of their comfort zone. But anytime you get out of your comfort zone, so I mean, you can take these little 30, 50-mile trips, or go to the grocery store in some people's cases, but just keep getting out of your comfort zone, because any meaningful experience really requires some level of discomfort, and travel can do that. And I would say, anytime that you experience some discomfort, whether it's through suffering or through an experience that you're just not, I used to have a profound fear of snakes, but, I got to the point where, I took a snake handling class and was able to touch rattlesnakes and, wrangle rattlesnakes, and where I couldn't even watch them on TV at one point. But I would say keep pushing yourself to experience some level of discomfort, getting outside of the comfort zone. Comfort zones are for couch potatoes. And when you do that, you're going to grow as a person.
Yeah, I've referred to it on the podcast many times as the bubble, and you have to get out of the bubble. Well, you don't have to. I mean, if you're happy in the bubble and that's what you're, if that's what you're good with, then, I guess I would say not everyone has to do it, but I think if you do, it can be very rewarding. And
well, I would challenge people to get out of their bubble, though, because I think people that don't get out of their bubble, they think what's in their bubble is the only thing that's normal. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why there's such a profound fear of, foreigners, people that, and I don't want to get too politicky, but people that um are from other religions, I mean, I've spent a lot of time now around Muslim people. Well, there's people, if they haven't experienced Muslim people and they only hear what might be on certain news channels, that you're not going to like Muslim people for the most part. And Muslim people are some of the nicest, greatest people. I mean, they're just like any other major religion. And you have sects of Christianity and Judaism and whatever that might not be nice people, but that's every religion and in every culture. And so if you don't experience other people in their environment, for example, when I went to Argentina, I had never had such a problem with language. I was completely duck out of water with the language, but people treated me so well. They didn't say, speak Spanish or get out of here. I mean, any country you go to, if you learn to say hello and you learn to say thank you, I mean, that's pretty much, what I found is almost all you need because, people enjoy, helping people for the most part. And if you don't get outside your bubble, you don't experience that. And no matter where you go around the world, at least where I've been, people are people. People for the most part are good people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I would agree with you that you're definitely doing yourself a disservice if you don't.
Yeah.
At least try. And I think if you do it right, you'll find that it is very rewarding, and hopefully find that it's worth it to keep doing and keep pushing more and more. I would say, I guess, on that note, is there more to your safari? I mean, there's definitely more to your safari. It was a 12-day.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that was like impactful, meaningful that you want to touch on before we move to wherever you went next?
Well, I would say too, I've never been somebody that would do group travel. So that was the first time I ever did a group travel. I went by myself, and again, I was the only American and I was the only English speaking. They all were able to speak English. That was the one common language we had. But I mean, I would do, and I again never wanted to, but I would definitely do it again because we got so close to each other in those 12 days. It's I don't know. I mean, I'd like to call them lifelong friends, but and you always intend to stay in touch, but I mean, life happens and you don't necessarily. But I mean, those are people that I'm always going to have a little place in my heart for now, I think. And you just spend 12 days going through with each other. I mean, how don't you bond? So I think that was a big piece. So if you're like me, I never, I got out of my comfort zone, I guess, and did something that I had never wanted to do and actually, refused to do because I could have gone on other things like that. And I declined because I'm like, why would I want to go with a bunch of other people that I don't know? And I'm so glad that I did.
Oh, and that's, I think what I was going to ask you actually was, what is your day like when you're on something like that? Like, how much of it is traveling from one place to another? Is it different every day? Maybe, but and how much of it is, when you get to a place, is that where you kind of hunker down and you just basically sit and watch, or do you wander? How is it? What is the day like?
Okay, so I'll explain where we went. So we went from Nairobi to the Masai Mara, which was a basically a day drive. And then, which is the craziest thing, is the Masai Mara and the Serengeti are connected. The Masai Mara is in Kenya and the Serengeti is in Tanzania, I believe, is how that works out. And you would just be able to drive right into the next one. But because Kenya and Tanzania don't have some shared agreement, we had to drive all the way around. So it was a 2-day drive to go from the Masai Mara to the Serengeti. So we broke that up into a few different days where then we had activities every day. So we went to a place called Mount Long Knot, which is a volcano. And we, hiked up this volcano, which was kind of, for me, it was a little brutal. But for the younger people that were with us, it wasn't so bad. But it was physically demanding and, beautiful view. And, and you see the gazelles and things like that now, as you're going up, and it's really pretty. And then the next day we went to a place called, that was the Lake Navasha, where we saw the hippos and we took a boat ride and things like that. What was her name? Joy Adamson. And anyway, there's this place called El Samir where she wrote a book about, Oh yeah, it was Joy Adamson, and she wrote a book about raising a lion. But anyway, so her and her husband George raised this lion called Elsa, and it was a famous book. And she did a lot of pictures that are of the different tribesmen and things. And but anyway, this is maybe 50 years ago. But her and her husband both were killed by poachers at different times, like 10 years apart. So anyway, for whatever reason, that was kind of meaningful to me. Went to a place called Hell's Gate where we rode our bikes and saw these zebras and giraffes and things. And it ends up being the place where the Lion King was based off of. It's Hell's Gate.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And then we drove down to a city called Arusha and we stayed in a coffee plantation one night. It almost looked like the White House. And in LA, it was beautiful and had dinner there out under the stars and that kind of thing. And it just real neat. And then the next day we drove to the Serengeti and we stayed a few nights in the Serengeti and toured that. And we went to the Ngorongoro crater after that. And you get real up close and personal with all the various animals there again. And then, we drove and you could see, it wasn't the perfect conditions, but you could see Mount Kilimanjaro as you're driving through. And one of the coolest things that I really enjoyed was we went and visited a Maasai village, and you go there, and it's authentic. I mean, these are truly Maasai people that are living in huts, and you know, um, and they came and invited us with a song, and then they invited us to dance with them, and they're famous for doing this jumping dance. So they just sit there and jump super high, and so I tried that out, and afterwards they had said, if once you jump, the girls are all watching, only the guys are jumping, and if the girls like the way you jump, they'll give you a shoulder, and if they give you a shoulder, that means that you're allowed to have sex with them that night, and so they gave us shoulders. We didn't have any sex though. But but that's
Thanks for keeping it PG-13.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. But you learned about their culture. So they have a man, and he can have whatever, however many wives, and the mans don't have huts. The women have the huts. So the women are in the huts, and the man just kind of goes between huts. Depends, whatever mood he's in. I guess he goes in whatever hut, and then and they basically cheat also. So if one of their Maasai sticks are in front of the door, it says don't enter. They're having relations in there, and one of the people I was with asked, well, what happens if your buddy gets your girlfriend or your wife pregnant? How do you know it's your kid? And he's like, of course it's my kid. It's my wife. It doesn't matter
Oh,
who's the
wow.
dad. Yeah, it was just really different. And I went in one of the huts and got a tour of it. They're tiny, and there's the children's bed, and there's a chicken in the bed, and it's just like, it's so neat, and they're happy, so it's like, if you can be happy, I mean, yeah, you got to place yourself outside your American, ideals and culture, and step into a different culture. But those people are just as happy, probably more happy than the average American, to be honest. And it's a whole different way of life. And you know I get
And I promise not to edit this down to where it says my favorite thing was getting the shoulder.
by the way, I got six shoulders.
Holy cow.
I think they were just teasing, but that is part of their ritual where they do that. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I gotta mention another thing, because this was a really unexpected highlight of my trip. So I've always had kind of again, ever since anthropology class, I've always had this love for Jane Goodall. I just see her as this advocate for, obviously animals and chimpanzees, but just the way she looks at life. And she had a real profound influence on the way I looked at religion. Like she was a Lutheran, but she thought, every religion probably prays to the same God. And that's sort of the view I was trying to develop at the time, because I grew up Catholic, but it's like, I don't believe that Catholic is the only right faith, and so I just kind of looked at life the way she did, and she really, really solidified the way I looked at it. And I'm like, well, if somebody like Jane Goodall can look at it like that, why can't I? Anyway, so we stopped to take a bathroom break after we left the Serengeti, and we stopped at this place called the Ovoldi Gorge. And I was reading the plaques and it's like, oh, Louis Leakey of Aldi, and it just clicked. I'm like, and this was 2 days after Jane Goodall died. So we stopped there, and I'm like, I recognize this place. This Jane Goodall wrote about this place. Well, the Uvalde Gorge. So Louis Leakey and Mary Leakey, um, they were anthropologists who dug up early humans to different species of humans and things, and millions of years old. And so it's one of the most important anthropological sites in the world, if not the most. And they call it like the cradle of humanity, I think. Some people think it's the Garden of Eden, even, where the first humans were at. But Jane Goodall was there helping Louis Leakey. So she had always wanted to go to Africa. She had loved George of the Jungle, and she just had books, and she always wanted to go to Africa, and that was her ticket to Africa. And so she was basically Louis Leakey's assistant, kind of his secretary. And she got to Africa, fell in love with Africa, and then she also was so good at helping Louis Leakey. Louis Leakey encouraged her to get her doctorate degree and things, and that's that was Jane Goodall's start in Africa. And I was sitting in that ground almost like I don't think anybody on that bus understood like how profound that stop was to me. Like, I'm there almost in tears, like, I can't believe, this just happened 2 days after she died. It was in Tanzania. That's where she went, and, she went to this place called, Gombe on the shores of Lake Tanganyika. But she got her start there, and it was just so humbling standing in her footsteps. And, and when you travel, I mean, you have those types of experiences no matter where you go. You're not going to have that exact experience probably ever, but those types of experiences happen when you put yourself out there and you get outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, without question. And I've definitely had things similar to that, where to be able to stand basically right where, or sit in a place where somebody, wrote a profound book, or, something like that. It is really, it kind of makes you realize, I guess, I don't know, how small we are, I guess, in a way, and how
Yeah.
small the world is too, I guess, in its own way as well.
Yeah, travel kind of, I'm a pilot. I fly recreationally, and looking down at the world from 5,000 feet is about where I fly at that level. But, I mean, but everybody knows what it's like to be up in a liner, or most everybody. And, looking down, and it's such a different perspective on the world. And I remember being up in my airplane during COVID and thinking like, man, all the panic down there, what's going on. And it just puts a different perspective. You see life through a different lens when you experience things. And travel is one of the best ways to experience life through a different lens. And it's a healthy lens. It's a good lens. And yeah, I mean, you just got to keep doing that.
It's probably my favorite lens, man. Yeah, it's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, that's your podcast, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, this wouldn't exist. So,
Yeah.
but anything else? This has been fantastic. I'm looking at the clock, and we're creeping on an hour, and we haven't really touched on the other places that you went in the last year or so.
Yeah.
Not that I'm in any rush, but just being respectful of people's time. Anything else from that trip before we move on to, I can't remember where you said you went next.
Yeah. So the last day, I was there a day longer than my trip also. So I was actually there for 2 weeks, and that's what it was. So I was in there for 2 weeks, but the actual safari was 12 days. So the last day I got in an Uber. There's Ubers pretty much literally everywhere around the world, and your Uber app will work. Everywhere I've been, pretty much my Uber app works. But I went to, do I have my book right here? Because I need to. Anyway, it was the person who wrote Out of Africa, and I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, but that was a memoir. So, and I'd never seen the movie, I'd never read the book, but going there and learning about it, first thing I did when I got back was watch the movie.
Karen Blixen?
Karen Blixen, yes. Yeah. Yeah, because the neighborhood is now called Karen, I think. So yeah, just a beautiful coffee plantation, and you learned about her Belgian story, and how she loved Africa, and yeah, and there's actually more to that movie, or more to the story, than what the movie shows, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, so that was my last little thing. But it seems like always that last day, I have some neat experiences no matter where I'm at. The last day I was in, Egypt was, I got to see so many cool things, and so glad I didn't just go straight to the airport or, hang out at the hotel. I kind of had to get my last little bit in, and that last little bit seems to always be fruitful.
So something like that, like this was a little bit different because you were on this like guided tour for 12 days. So having an extra
Mhm.
day to kind of do what you want is that makes
Yeah.
sense. But
Yeah.
like something like that, like I know we talked about Egypt before,
Mhm.
but did you kind of go into something like that and you have a plan for the things that you absolutely want to see and do, but then do you kind of leave like the last day open because you weren't doing guided tours like this?
Yeah.
So when you say that last day you kind of have something special happen, it's is that because you kind of just have an unplanned let's just explore day?
Well, the way I travel, I have a general sense of what I want to do. I'll have like my top 10 list or whatever of things that I really want to do. But I also leave it open. I like to semi-plan my vacations. I used to really overplan, I think, and I found that you don't necessarily hit everything, and you don't, you know,
It's also
some
stressful.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I think also when you don't have a plan, that opens up to just experiencing more of the city's culture or the place's culture, where like, oh, that's a neat looking coffee shop. I'm gonna go sit in there, and then you're sitting in there with locals or whatever. And so if you just have things what from your Frommers and Froders books and Moon books and books like that, where and I get one for every city I go to, but I also very loosely follow those things. Like I kind of hit the main things, the main attractions, and then look through them through things that might interest me. But for the most part, I leave a big portion of my vacations open to just experiencing things that I find there.
I think that's awesome. I think that's the
Mhm.
ideal way to do it. I think the best way is to have maybe a handful of touch points or whatever, however many places that how long depends on how long you're in a place.
Right.
These are the sites that I would be really upset with myself if I didn't experience this when I leave because I might never get back.
Yep.
But then have that flexibility and time, maybe even every day they have some time
Yeah.
just to explore.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're going on a group tour, you do that, but um, you do what they tell you to do. But for the most part, yeah, go on. Buenos Aires was a great example. It's like I had my, two places that I had to go to. I wanted to go to the Recoleta Cemetery, and I wanted to go to um, God, I keep forgetting what it's called, the ESMA, and where they um, ha- captured the 30,000 people, and they call them they disappeared them. But those are the two places I really wanted to go. But I also found Buenos Aires to be just this amazing city, and we can move into that now if you want.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's do that. So
Yeah.
how long were you there for?
So I was in Buenos Aires for I think it was 6 days, and then I went to so that's it was the same trip, but so I try to usually get in a couple different countries when I go on go somewhere farther. So I went to Buenos Aires for 6 days, and then I was in Cusco, Machu Picchu area for about 5 days. So Buenos Aires, though, the city itself reminded me a lot of Paris, but it wasn't as polished as Paris, which I loved. I kind of pictured it as what Paris might have looked like 75 years ago or 50 years ago, where, it was, like it was such a super romantic city. Gosh, I wish I had somebody, you know, that I was dating back then, because that what a romantic city. And, there's you didn't see any, or at least I didn't really see any chain, like department stores and things like that. It was all these corner stores. Every block had, it was just like fruit stands, and, there's so many dogs walking around with people. If you want to go see beautiful dogs, I mean, they're just like, I mean, they're just part of the culture. And, a lot of them aren't even on leashes. They just walk right with their owners across this busy city streets, and it was just really neat. Um, but the architecture is very European, but also there's this Latin just flair to everything, and it's gorgeous. And I went to a tango performance, and it was just really, really cool. I'm like, gosh, I want to, like I wanted more of it. Like I had no idea how cool tango would be and how beautiful and romantic it was. And so I went and found a place where I could take tango lessons. So, and this is where I kind of chickened out though. So I get to this uh tango club, and there's probably 200 people in this tango club. Um and half of them are out on the dance floor doing, yeah, maybe 100 people. And half of them are out on the dance floor, doing these tango lessons, and the other half are just kind of watching. And I just sat there and watched. Part of the reason is like I can't speak Spanish, so I just sort of sat there by myself watching. But like, it's just such a neat experience. I was probably the only American in that place. I mean, it was pretty cool.
So if you had had a dance partner, then maybe you would have done it.
I would have at least tried, yeah. It's kind of funny because I was live posting on Facebook. I'm like, okay, I'm sitting in this, and I was getting all these girls saying, "Go do it! Don't be a chicken. Just ask somebody to dance." And like, well, they don't speak English necessarily, and so I didn't do it. But so I was kind of kicking myself, but also laughing and having a good time.
Well, at least you enjoyed the scenery.
Yeah,
Um, so
but
tell me more about Buenos Aires. So besides the dancing, you went to the cemetery and you went to the other place. And I definitely have to hear about whatever happened on the last day too.
on the last day, well, I don't know that the last day in Buenos Aires was. I mean, I went to a neighborhood called Caminito, which it's really famous for being. I believe it was more like the Italian immigrants there. And gosh, what? Anyway, so it's famous for how different colored, and the buildings might be really like bright blue and bright red, and it's just kind of a different flair to the city. And they have beautiful murals and things like that. And the restaurants are nice, and I shouldn't say nice. They're very authentic. They have a little. I mean, I would say almost Buenos Aires in general has a little grit to it. Which makes it even cooler in my opinion. It's like some of these cities, like Paris. Really, Paris is a beautiful city and everybody should go there, but it's just so polished that it's so tourist friendly. It's so that where Buenos Aires, they're not catering to the tourists, which
Yeah,
just makes it. I love
that's pretty
it.
cool.
Yeah, if I had to pick to go, I would go to Buenos Aires every time.
So tell me more about, because you touched on the cemetery, and you touched on the other place with the ESMR, or whatever I can't remember what you said it was. Um, Anything about those that just stood out to you that were memorable? Obviously, it was memorable.
Yeah, the ESMA. So the Dirty War. They had 30,000 people that were disappeared there, and they had all these pictures on their wall. But it really, they had a democracy. They had as similar to the United States. I mean, they were a democracy, and they were overthrown sort of from within, and um they became this dictatorship. And and they took out their political opponents, and people just disappeared off the street. There's these, if you walk around and you notice enough, you see these little plaques in the ground, like into the sidewalk, and they would give a person's name and then the date that they disappeared. And that was one nice thing. With Chat GPT, I would take pictures of these because I couldn't read what they said. I'm like, well, that looks something like that means something. And then after a while, you understand what these are. But you take a picture of them, and like, yeah, this is somebody's name, and they disappeared during the Dirty War at this.
So these people were people that they presumed opposed them when they took power. I'm
Yes.
guessing it wasn't just
Yep.
random people.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are random people. Yeah, people that they just didn't
Show
like
of
their family.
power.
They didn't like their family. Exactly. It was like, you guys either follow us, or we're just going to start taking people. And yeah, so you're walking through this compound where all these people were taken to, and they were just stored there. They would have these, about the size of a coffin is what where they had to stay like all the time. I didn't read where they went to the bathroom, but you know but they didn't get to move around very much. And one of the most torturous things, it's right in the middle of Buenos Aires. So there's a soccer stadium nearby. So they likely heard the soccer stadium. So that like life, it kind of like probably how Alcatraz was, is like you see the, San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge, but yet you're stuck as a prisoner in there, and you just hear life going on, and you're stuck in there. And I'm sure that was like 100 times worse than even Alcatraz. So, but yeah, they would drug them and throw them in airplanes and throw them out of these airplanes, alive. And the airplane that they did that in is there, as a memorial.
Oh my gosh. And how long ago
Yeah.
was this?
This was in the 70s and 80s.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't even that long ago. Yeah. And then, yeah. And fortunately, it's back to more of a democracy. But um, yeah, one interesting thing is, so I got out of the subway, and, I grew up Catholic, and, I really liked, Pope Francis, and I saw Pope Francis at the Vatican give a talk. But anyway, so Buenos Aires is, and I actually wasn't even planning on going here, but the first place I stopped, I got on a subway train, and I actually stayed I just stayed in a neighborhood in a somebody's apartment that they rented out, and which was really cool. So I didn't stay in any nice hotel. I just stayed in an apartment building. So I was in this just random neighborhood in Buenos Aires, which was awesome just to have that experience for a week. But then I went into the subway, and I just got out of the subway. I wanted to see the place where Evita gave her, farewell speech. And the first place I saw before I got to that was this large cathedral. And I go in there, and that's the place where Pope Francis was the archbishop. And like, gosh, like how, and Pope Francis is also very famous for just riding the subways to work, and it's like, God, the subway I was just on is probably the same subway that he went to work every day in. And,
Sure.
it's just like how much meaning in that. And that was right after well, not too long after, probably a month or whatever, after the whole Super Bowl thing with Bad Bunny, and how much controversy that was, which was ridiculous. And, it just,
Most
you know,
beautiful halftime performance I've ever seen, by the way. I'm gonna put that on the
Mhm.
record.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And actually I bought a hat, because I can't remember. He holds that football up, and it says something like, oh, something about America. We are all America, or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. But I bought a hat that's brown that said that same thing, and I was wearing that hat, and you know, I took it off for the cathedral, but like I had tears in my eyes, just like thinking about all this stuff, and how much Pope Francis loved, everybody, all humans. And here I am kind of loving them. I don't know. But it was just a meaningful thing, and it's hard to put into words. I'd have to sit and think about it, but then, yeah, then you get out, and then you see the I can't remember the square it's called, but just outside of where, so it's kind of like the White House, but it's pink, and that's where their president does their work. But you can see where Evita gave her talk from, her farewell speech. But then there's this little square down there with these scarves, and I noticed these scarves all over Argentina. After a while, you start, noticing things, but these scarves, and I went back to this place once I realized what these scarves actually represented, and these scarves represented mothers who lost their children during the dirty war to these disappearances, because they they stole kids too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
still keep these scarves out there today.
Yeah, well, they're
Probably not the same ones that were there have been
no,
there
they're
forever, but
they're not literal scarves. They're like engraved into the
oh,
ground and things. Yeah, or painted on things, but you'll notice that when you're in Buenos Aires, there's definitely a theme with scarves, and that's what the scarves represent, is the mourning of the mothers. And actually, in that square that I was at, there's a circle within that square with scarves in them, into the ground. So, and it's in a circle, and the women, the mothers, every year would, just, or maybe it was even more frequent than every year. It might have been just every day, even when it first was happening. But they would just walk around this circle until they got answers to what happened to their children.
well,
Yeah, yeah.
making me sad, man. Okay, so I definitely
Well, I want to say this though. Some places aren't just to entertain you. I mean, some places are meant to change you, and I think, again, people are traveling more to be changed than they are to just relax. And I'm a big advocate of that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I would definitely I think I would really enjoy it. And maybe that's a place that I think I should go. I think I would really enjoy that. I love places that I go where I can feel history and I can really learn something and grow as a human being. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I know you said you went somewhere else besides Peru, right?
Yeah. Well,
Or
main,
besides Mesa. Was that the other Peru was the other place outside the country?
yeah, Peru. Yep.
Because
Yeah. But
I'm obviously
so
having been there.
I went to school. Yeah. So I went to Kenya, Tanzania, Peru, and Argentina were the 4 countries I've been to since we last chatted.
Gotcha. So before we get to the final 5 questions, because I'm going to run them back for you, even because it's been well over a year since we did this the first time, and I don't even know if do you even remember those questions?
I don't know.
They'll come back to you. They'll come back to you. But I definitely want to hear all you have to tell about your experiences in Cusco and Machu Picchu and Aguas Calientes. I loved Aguas Calientes too. Actually, I thought it was a
Yeah.
cool little town. But
Yeah.
please tell me about your experiences in Peru.
So yeah, the first day I got there, I guess I really didn't know a lot. I didn't read enough in the book. I know the main reason I went there was to go to Machu Picchu. But the first day I went there, I ended up in their main square there, and I ended up in another church, kind of their main, so they have a lot of, I guess it's the Spanish Inquisition. Is that what it is? That where the Spaniards came in and they overthrew the Incas, and they kind of ended up having some collaboration, but when the Spaniards got there, um, what they witnessed was something just unreal. So the Inca would keep their leaders. They didn't believe people necessarily died. They just, so their bodies, they still would, so they would parade around their leaders once a year, in a parade that had deceased. So they're deceased leaders, and they would have parades with them. And that's what the Spaniards came. So anyway, they still have this tradition though, but instead of parading around the dead leaders of the Inca, they parade around Christian. So the Inca became highly Christian after the Spanish came in, because that's kind of what they wanted to do with the Incas. But there's still a lot of Inca culture there. But anyway, they now parade around these statues once a year. So we're seeing these different statues in this, beautiful cathedral. And they wouldn't let you take pictures inside this cathedral, but it's some of the most beautiful stuff that I've ever seen inside. I like touring cathedrals. They're beautiful.
I
And
agree.
but some of the paintings and the statues, and they would they would change, a lot of Jesus's and Mary's, they would have like actual clothes on them. So Jesus would wear like kind of a skirt looking thing, and they would change these beautiful skirts, once a week or once a month or whatever. But then once a year they take, depending on what holiday is, they'll take some of the statues out and do parades down the street, just like, the Inca used to do with their deceased leaders.
This was in Cusco, correct?
This was in Cusco. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And even that day I was there, they had a massive parade with, that was very cultural, and yeah, it was neat. It was almost like going to a Native American powwow is witnessing something very cultural and beautiful.
That's very cool. I believe the day that we spent in the square, which was it's a really pretty square. There, if I recall, I want to say there was 1 or 2 like chain restaurants. I was very surprised.
Yeah.
Maybe I had recognized.
KFC. Yeah.
Yeah, KFC and something else maybe, but we did find a local place to have some lunch, and it was awesome because they had their own
Mhm.
local brew, and kind of thought I think it was like the first or second night we were there, and I thought, man, probably shouldn't drink alcohol right now. This is the highest elevation I've ever been in my life, but still had a beer, and just looking out over the square it was awesome. We didn't get to
Yeah.
see any sort of parades, and I want to say the cathedral was actually locked when we were there for some reason. I don't know why, so we did not get to go inside,
Yeah.
but very very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that first day too. Yeah. I went and had um, a pretty, I don't know, ethnic cultural dinner, looking down over that square. And yeah, it's just such a cool, that Inca statue. I'm sure you saw that, which was really kind of neat. Held a llama, which was cool. Um, but did you spend any time in the Sacred Valley?
No, we did not. We went from Cusco directly to Aguas Calientes. We took the train. And actually, I want to say the train stop closest to Cusco was closed. So we actually had to take a shuttle to a different train station and then board the train to go to Aguas Calientes. So I did
Yeah.
not get to the Sacred Valley. I think if I went again, I would definitely want to do that though as well.
Yeah, the Sacred Valley was really neat, and it certainly wasn't Machu Picchu, but you know, when I spent that time in Cusco, I mean, there was a few days I had, and actually, it's kind of funny because the altitude thing is the book I bought. I think it was Moon or something like that, or Frommers or whatever. But they said, the first thing you should do in Cusco is go down in the Sacred Valley because you're going to get sick because of the altitude. If you're not used to the altitude, you're going to get sick. And then I had talked to somebody on the airplane who does actual tours, and they're like, yeah, you know, you might want to get an oxygen bottle or that kind of thing, and so I got there thinking like, I am going to get sick. I don't have any of this crap. I'm going to end up in the in the clinic or whatever with altitude sickness, and they were saying don't or they're telling they have the cocoa leaves and they have this cocoa tea, not like chocolate cocoa, but
Oh
it's
no,
more,
no,
yeah,
coca, yeah, coca, because it's actually
coca, yeah,
it's
yeah,
the
coca.
cocaine plant.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a stimulant,
Yes,
but yeah, yeah, it's illegal to bring in the United States. I learned that,
yeah,
but
and I didn't bring any back with me. Wink, wink.
they, you didn't. Huh? He's just like I've never brought back a Cuban cigar either. But
Good, we're good. We're good then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I won't tell if you don't. But your listeners, I don't know. Anyway,
No one listens.
so
We're good.
okay, good. But yeah, they have candies and things like that. But I researched it a little more, and with my transplant, yeah, I was kind of cautioned to not partake in that tradition.
I will say the coca tea did help a lot. I drank it a
Okay.
couple of times. I actually liked so the place that we stayed was an Airbnb and they provided some in their kitchen there and I partook of that a couple of times. I needed it. It wasn't severe, but I
Yeah,
needed it. But
yeah.
we went to we walked down to a local coffee shop and I tried some there. I didn't like it, like their own home brewed or whatever it was. Like
Oh, really?
it was not good. But I have to say this because it jumped into my mind and I don't want to lose the thought. That was one of the coolest flying experiences I've ever had flying into Cusco because
Oh,
you're
really?
still at 10,000 feet and
Wow.
you're just over the top of land. And it's like, that's amazing to me to be 10,000 feet in the air and flying pretty darn close to the tops of mountains.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
some really cool photos of that. It was awesome.
Yeah, we went in at nighttime, so I didn't get to see that. But yeah, I'm sure it was pretty. And being a pilot, I know that it's a lot harder to stop when you're higher up, and it's a lot harder to get off the ground too. So as a pilot, that was kind of in my brain. I'm like, oh, how long is it going to take this plane to stop and take off? But but it all worked out. I'm alive.
Clearly. So then you obviously, like I did, I'm sure you took well, you went through the Sacred Valley.
Yeah, so the Sacred Valley was cool because, we went up to these, ancient ruins, and also in Cusco, I spent a day just going to different ancient ruins and the Sun Temple and all these different neat places and learned about the Inca culture and that was cool. So ended up in the Sacred Valley and I went with a tour group. I did do a tour group with that too. So and probably part of the reason I went on this tour group is because of my experience was so good in Africa, then I'm like, "Oh, all these tour groups aren't so bad." So I went with this tour group through the Sacred Valley, and, we went to this place called I think it was called Moray, where they have these, circles in the ground, and then as the mountain goes up, then the circle so there's different levels of circles, or even if you notice the mountainside, you probably saw that where they have these just different flat levels, and as basically their fields, they plant crops on those. And, and what they had found is, and the reason that they did the circle thing, these Inca people are just brilliant, where
Mm-hmm.
so they realized that certain crops only grew at certain altitudes, but they also realized that crops could adapt over time if you just So they would have these, like on the bottom, they had the circle and they'd plant whatever crop in there. Let's just call it corn. So they plant corn in there and it didn't grow at the next altitude. So they would create a new altitude that they could plant these crops on. So they would genetically change easier. And then they just, over time, you could plant the corn higher and up.
Yeah, and they also, if I'm not mistaken, our taxi driver, Uber driver, whatever it was that we had
Mhm.
to the train station, was saying that, and even tomatoes, I think, was the example he used. But the
Mhm.
higher the elevation that they can grow, the better they are, because they have to
Oh,
fight harder to grow and thrive.
oh,
So,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, that's what he had said to us. I assume that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have no idea, but sounds like it certainly could be true. So yeah, and we stopped at a salt I don't know, place where they pick salt and salt mine, I guess. And but it's still the same families that started this salt mine, hundreds of years ago, or are the same families that run it. Each family in this town has a little plot within the salt, and that's what they do for their jobs is they go take out the salt once a week or whatever. So that's cool. They still do it, and a lot of the salt in the world, comes from this salt mine. And yeah, what else did we see in the Sacred Valley? Just being in the ancient, and I have a picture. I just went and knelt down right by a llama that was just, people were taking pictures with this llama and they could put their hand on it, and it's just a wild llama that was letting you do that, and that was kind of cool. Yeah, so a lot of neat experiences, and I don't drink any alcohol anymore, but they have Inca Cola that I really started enjoying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty good.
Yeah, kinda tastes like bubble gum. Yeah, and then that city, that Caliente or whatever that you
Aguas Calientes, yeah.
yeah, that was a neat city, but we got there real late, and when we took the train in, you couldn't see anything because it was dark. But the train ride out, oh my god, that panoramic view of the mountains and, oh, just beautiful even leaving that, so
It's beautiful as long as you're in the right seat, because otherwise, if it's a warm day and that sun just beats on you, it can be brutal. So that's a tip, if there's any, if you're taking the train ride from or to Cusco and Aguas Calientes, you gotta pick your seat wisely.
yeah, I wouldn't know that because I didn't experience that.
Yeah, I think we were pretty lucky, but we had an older couple that was across from us, and the poor gentleman, I mean, he was just baking in the sun the
Oh,
entire ride.
no.
But he finally, like, he would just stand up and walk around, and he, like, couldn't even sit because, yeah, it was brutal. But
Wow.
but it's still a beautiful ride, and the sights you see in between the places, and you kind of get to see a little bit of what you are. Well, you rode at night on the way in, but
Mhm.
we rode in during the day, and so just to see, like, oh, here's this, like, multi-level, very small scale, of course, but these little multi-level tiered plots of land and stuff, and you go, oh, well, we're going to see something like that when we get to Machu Picchu, but obviously it doesn't really set you up for, once you're
Yeah.
there, it's just incredible.
Yeah. Was the clouds floating through just
Yeah,
like
so
on a postcard for you?
when we first got there, again, we got there probably midday, because we had a ticket for the evening. And so we got there kind of midday, and we went up and we kind of did the basic level, first level, whatever, and then
Mhm.
walked around, saw the sights, went back down and got some dinner or whatever, and got to bed early, because then we took the first ride up, like you'd said, like 6 in the morning.
Mhm.
And that day we took a different trail, and I don't remember what their ABC, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And this one we actually climbed up, and I've said this on the podcast. I should research it because I don't remember, but it's not Huayna Picchu. It's not the tallest peak, but it's like the
Mhm.
intermediate one. So we actually, first thing we got there, we went and we climbed up to the top of that,
Yeah.
and it was just incredible. The climb up was a little harrowing because I'm not a fan of heights typically, and it's not like it's not a tourist thing. It's not made for people. They have kind of made some steps and things and made a little, maybe a rope here and there, but once you got up there, yeah, it was just completely, not completely cloud covered, but you were in the clouds for sure. And then they started to kind of dissipate a little bit while we were up there, and it's just like you said. I mean, it's indescribable. It's so peaceful, and
Yeah.
to look down upon the top of Machu Picchu is like, that's where you get your photos. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, if you wanna get a good photo. impossible to not get one there. That's for sure. I felt bad though, because the tour group I went, so I followed your advice and I went and did the main level first, and then later in the day I did up top. But anyway, other people I was with did the exact opposite, and they were basically clouded, or not clouded out, but they're like, the haze was so thick in the morning that they couldn't really see until later in the day. So they had to stay up there for, several hours, and I got this great experience. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a crapshoot, though, honestly. Like, it
yeah.
could have been complete opposite, So we actually got really lucky. At one point, we actually saw a rainbow, and I don't think that it was even
Mm.
really, like, raining, but what a cool photo that was to get a rainbow while you're up in the top of Machu Picchu walking through these places. One of the things that stood out to me the most when we were there, and obviously our tour guide he was really good, and he pointed it out to us, but
Mhm.
the irrigation system.
Yeah, yeah. It's impressive.
How advanced is that for when they built it? I mean,
Yeah,
mind blowing.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, did you notice the, being my dark tourist self, did you notice the Inca, they had their cemeteries in the side of the hills. I didn't see anything around Machu Picchu, but I guess going through the Sacred Valley, they pointed it out. But in the side of the hills, they have a lot of just holes in the side of the hills. I'm like, what are those holes up there? That's where they stuck people.
yeah, I didn't see any of that, but I do remember because obviously when you're in Machu Picchu, there are different parts of it that are only open during certain times of the day, and
Mm.
the names of them are escaping me, and I'm sorry for that. But there is one area, and I want to say uh, it was sort of like honoring some bird, and I don't remember what the bird was, but you could see like the formation of the rocks. If you looked at it just right, you could see the shape of this bird, and we couldn't go back in there, but back in and down was like the prison.
Oh, I guess I didn't see you in the prison.
Oh, it was cool once you're there, but again, we couldn't actually go like down in or get super close. But
Yeah.
just it was just
What?
basically a dark hole, and I could only imagine what it was like down inside of there.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty bad, I'm sure. But I know, like, they had what did they believe? Like, there's 3 different levels of life or whatever, and, but the temples, like the Sun Temple and then that Bird Temple, gosh, I wish I remembered better. But, um, but yeah, each of those temples had different meanings and things, and the Sun Temple was the highest temple, and that must have been heaven, and the bird was the middle, and then there was, like, what was it? Maybe the Jaguar level. But anyway, but all those different, yeah, it was just such a neat, and then the beautiful, just ancient stairways, and
Yeah, and
so
walking
yeah.
through the buildings, obviously they had at the time that I was there, they had one, I believe, that they had kind of reconstructed the roof, or they were reconstructing the roof at the time. That's like the thatch, whatever. But most of them obviously are just left the way they were because when the Incas left, when they found the Spaniards were coming, they burned everything because they were like, "You can come, you're just not going to get anything," and so
Mhm.
they burned everything down. And there was a couple of places inside of these buildings that obviously they're just walls now, stone walls, but there were like little pockets of like almost like a small, what I imagine it to be is some sort of a small tunnel through the walls. I don't know that this is true, but this was my thought, was like it was a way to communicate through the walls somehow inside of the building. I could be completely wrong,
Mhm.
because nobody told me this. I just like we would kind of stand. My wife at the time and I would kind of stand by different ones and try to maybe talk to each other, see if we could hear each other or something.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we could, but there's just so many different really cool things in there to see and
Yeah.
just to
Well,
live
I
in.
wanna I wanna get on my soapbox for 1 minute. So maybe some of your listeners will write a letter or something. But, so Germany, they have Nefertiti, the bust of Nefertiti in Berlin. And it's beautiful. I've seen it, and it is a beautiful, beautiful statue. And Nefertiti must have been an absolute beautiful, beautiful woman. Back in the early 1900s or whatever, when they went in and they basically stole Nefertiti out of Egypt. They swindled, I guess is the best word. They swindled Nefertiti from the Egyptian people, said it wasn't worth anything, and they brought it in, and it's a priceless artifact. So we kind of did the same thing. So Hiram Bingham, who discovered, rediscovered, I should say, Machu Picchu. And actually,
Early 18
yeah, well, I think it was in the 19. Did you say early 1900s?
or 18 something.
Oh, well, I thought it was
I
about
thought it was
1900s, but
yeah, I thought it was early 1900s.
yeah, yeah. Um, but anyway, like a 12-year-old boy is the one that showed it to him, and but hearing Brigham, I mean, he was a hell of an explorer. I mean, he definitely deserves a lot of credit for helping rediscover that. But Yale University had all the artifacts, and they made this big deal that like they gave Peru some of the artifacts back. So there's a museum in Peru, in Cusco, where you can see some of the artifacts from Machu Picchu, but it's still only about 25% of the artifacts found at Machu Picchu and Yale University. I believe it's Yale, not 100%. But Yale University still has, 75% of the artifacts, and Egypt wants Nefertiti back, and that's completely colonialism and how they swindled it from her or from them. And the same thing with but the United States is, kind of the guilty of people on that one. And I think we need to do the right thing and give Peru back their artifacts, as well
Yeah.
as, we need to give the Native Americans their back, if they want things back that are at some of our museums, and so on and so on and so on, for whatever culture. I mean, give it back to the people that it belongs to.
Yeah. I mean, possession is 9/10 of the law is not doesn't apply probably in a lot of these situations. And even if it was
Yeah.
like, it's 25%, 75% in US favor right now, maybe
Mhm.
even if that was flip-flopped, I mean, that would be more fair
Yeah,
than
absolutely. Yeah.
than what it is.
Yeah.
Man. Well, this is awesome, dude. I want to say I always love talking to you. This is only the second time we've done this. I always love talking to you. We've talked for hours on the phone before,
Yeah.
and we always have great conversations. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on before we get to those final 5 questions? Sorry to just, I don't mean to just take you off your soapbox, but
No, no, no.
but it's a good
People
point.
people definitely need to take me off my soapbox sometimes. But yeah, yeah, no, I think we hit everything that I was really thinking.
Some amazing, amazing stories. I love the stuff that you talked about with the safari, especially. But I digress.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to run through the final 5. If anything
Yeah.
comes to mind, and you can expand as much as you like, I'll alter them a little bit. But if nothing has changed, again, even if people listen to the first episode, it's probably been a while. So, question number 1. I'll ask it this way: of the places that you went in the last year since we spoke,
Mhm.
what is your most memorable meal experience that you had on that trip or
Most
any of those
memorable.
trips?
But, the most memorable meal experience was probably the meal that I didn't have. So, because of my transplant, I am not allowed to have buffets. Sometimes I cheat, but, I really have to calculate the risks. And so I was in a very ethnic place in Tanzania, and it was the kitchen, and it wasn't to US health codes, let's say. But it was a beautiful place. I mean, I would have loved to eat there. The food looked so good, and it was like just a beautiful home cooked Tanzanian meal, and everybody loved it. And I didn't eat any of it, and my tour guide actually got mad at me. He just didn't understand how somebody could not eat it. Even though I told them before I went on my tour that like I can't eat a lot of things. I actually got in a little bit of trouble throughout he's like, Chad, you're not eating. I'm eating a lot of chips and candy when we stop places because it's in wrappers. And but I've been really careful. I didn't drink any of the water. I was really careful because I have to, I'm on these medications that, I can get sick really easy. And but that was, I felt terrible for not eating it. But at the same time I made the right decision, I think. But that was the most memorable meal, to be honest, is sitting there watching everybody eat this great looking meal, and I'm not eating anything and kind of getting in trouble. And later on, I was talking to the tour guide that was kind of pissed at me for not eating that meal. And he's basically saying that, he was explaining what appendicitis, this thing, when somebody hurts, and we figured out he's talking about an appendicitis. And he said, that's fatal in his country. If somebody gets an appendicitis, you're dead. So I don't think he understood really what a liver transplant actually is, which, goes to show you that, healthcare around the world is definitely different in different places.
Yeah, the knowledge is different. The
Yeah.
the technology hasn't hit certain places, of course. Do you remember what kind of things that they were eating? I mean, I'm assuming it's not a typical like an American style buffet. I mean, the
Yeah.
style might be, but not the foods.
Yeah. I honestly don't remember exactly what they were eating, but a lot of, really good looking meat and rice dishes and um, different vegetables. Yeah. I don't know. Beans, but yeah.
I wasn't sure if there's like
A,
something that's common there.
a lot of good. Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
What kinds of things were you eating on the safari? Like when you guys would sit around at night or whatever, or were you eating like just sitting around like around the campfire eating stuff, or were you eating at like restaurants or
Yeah, we had a lot of rice, a lot of beans, a lot of chicken, um, and that's kind of what I stuck to. I'm a very picky eater besides, so um, so yeah, I it was difficult for me to eat. So I'm not one. I love culture, love everything. I wish I wasn't a picky eater. It's like the bane of my travel existence anyway.
were you like that before the liver transplant, or just because of it, you have to really just be so careful?
Well, I was a picky eater before, but now I have to be very picky. So even foods that are kind of my safe foods, I still can't eat if it's not the right situation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't screw around with something like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, very good. All right. So, question number two, I'll ask it the same way I always do because I don't know if you'll have the same answer, and I don't remember what your answer was the first time I asked, and I might remember actually. But go ahead. So, question number two is: of all the places in the world that you have ever been, I won't limit it to this last year. If I was to even say to you, Chad Scott, here you go, have a free trip wherever to this place, you would turn it down and say, no, thank you. I don't want to go back.
I don't think there's a place that I would ever do that, but kind of the place that I had the highest hope for and had probably the lowest return on was Jamaica. And the reason being is we stayed in all inclusive and it rained a lot and I just want to go explore. And we even went to Negril on the 7 Mile Beach and we could explore a little bit, but there just wasn't a lot other than laying on the beach. And I love the beach. I mean, I can do a beach for a day or two, but I can't spend 5 days sitting on a beach. I don't care how beautiful it is.
I do believe that Jamaica was your answer the first time as well.
That I remember. That was my answer. Yeah.
So very fair. So flipping that around, and we'll see if it's the same answer as before. Again,
Mhm.
I definitely don't remember this one. Of all the places in the world that you have been, question three, and I've changed it a little bit. I've limited the answer now. So, of all the places in the world you have been, if you only have one or two trips left in your lifetime, where would the one or two places that you would be that you would have to go back to for sure?
Jerusalem. I can't wait to. Well, actually, Israel, Jerusalem. The West Bank. That place was so profound to me. And I went there and I wasn't that religious, and I came out a little more religious. But I think what got me so much there is you have the different cultures. You have within the old city of Jerusalem, which is relatively small. You have the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter, and they're all different, and they're all and for the most part, people from I don't know what it's like now, but I went there maybe it was 3 years ago, but people just intermingled with each other. For the most part, they stayed in their own quarters, but they also intermingled, and there was no hate, and there was it just felt beautiful, and also how much people believed in their religions, and seeing people cry at the Western Wall, and seeing the Muslims run towards to their call to prayer and their services, and and then walking through the church of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where the Calvary Hill, where you can stick your hand in the very spot, by tradition, the very spot where Jesus's cross was, and then you walk down and you can touch the stone where he was anointed with oils his body, and then you can go into the tomb where he rose 3 days later. I mean, this is all in the same church. And I'll put a nice video of that on my Instagram. But yeah, that for sure. And the others, I'll say right now, uh, God, I would love to go on safari again, but I also really liked, if it was just a city, is Buenos Aires. That was a great place.
Excellent. Excellent. Very cool. So definitely a little bit of different answers. I don't remember if Jerusalem was or Israel was your first answer or not, but excellent, excellent. So now, and see if this has changed. Again, I don't remember, but question number 4 is, of all the places in the world that you have never been, but again, you only have 1 or 2 trips left in your lifetime for whatever reason, what are the 1 or 2 places in the world that you absolutely must get to?
That is a great question. So I want to get to Churchill, Manitoba. And that's something that's pretty realistic, where Churchill, Manitoba is about, um, gosh, I don't know, about 500 miles north of Winnipeg or something. I mean, maybe it's a farther than that. But anyway, it's where the polar bears congregate at, at a certain time of the year. And you can take a train up there from Winnipeg. It's a couple days train ride. And so I don't know. I just love animals in their natural environment. So probably there. And I would say somewhere. So I went to Japan, but I would say Japan was. I think I want to experience a little more hardcore. Something like China or Vietnam or a place like that where you know Japan is also just very clean, and I mean, it's great. It's very beautiful, very traditional. It'd probably be it's a great place to go for sure. I think it's one of the absolute top tourist destinations where people, especially in the last few years, I think it's might even be number one is Tokyo. But I just liked it so much that I just want to get more into I like grit. I like, some, things that aren't as Americanized, I guess, or westernized. And in Japan, even though it's very traditional, it still has a little bit of that, you still feel, you know, it still feels a little
It's touristy.
touristy. Yeah.
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 They're not everything is just they're doing it for themselves. They're doing things specifically to attract. And I get that. Like
Mhm.
you were saying with Buenos Aires, like I'm sure that there's probably maybe some areas of it that are trying to attract tourists. But if, I think there's something different. I agree with you 1,000%. Going to a place that they're there, they're living their lives. If you want to come visit, cool.
Yeah.
You're going to
Yeah.
see us as we are, and we welcome you, but we're not going out of our way.
Yep. And I would say, Cairo, I think they get so many tourists. I mean, I wouldn't say it's touristy per se, but they get so many tourists there that, you get so many panhandlers. It was just one after another after another. And even people that weren't panhandling, they were, trying to get money for pushing an elevator button and giving you, towels in the public bathrooms. And it was just every second there was somebody trying to get money. And in Buenos Aires, never, I don't think they're used to having that many tourists or, into that degree. So that you just don't have that culture of people trying to get money from tourists.
Yeah. One of these days, you and I will plan a guy's trip to Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's
There we go.
probably one of my top 3 on my list. So
Yeah. I'd
excellent.
love to go to Vietnam for sure.
It's been so awesome hanging out with you again, Dr. Chad. Question number 5, we'll wrap with this. I say it's an easy one if you have plans. Question number 5 is, what is on your docket? What do you have planned? Where are you going in the next year or so?
I'm looking at Scotland, with the dark tourism history, and the person who wrote my foreword, who is, he's the world's foremost academic in dark tourism. He wrote a book recently on dark tourism in Scotland, and it just looks like such a fascinating place. I write a little bit about Scotland in my book. I've never been there, but I wrote a little bit about it because it's such a historic place, and I just wanted to make a mention of that for people that are looking for ideas for dark tourism. But I want to experience that myself. It's probably one of the top 3 places in the world for dark tourism.
Nothing set in stone, but you think this year or early next year?
It's hard to say. I took a new job this year, and now I'm seeing a new gal. So it's, who knows? But the plan was to go there this summer, but I got to earn my vacation time and just kind of see where life takes me.
5B. I just thought of this.
Yeah.
5B, and I might start instituting this into my podcast. 5B is why not Manitoba? It's one of your must get tos, and why wouldn't that be? Because we don't know how long we have.
Why not Manitoba?
Isn't that where you were going to see the polar bears?
Oh,
Well,
yeah, Churchill, Manitoba. Yeah, yeah. Why
So
not?
not being philosophical necessarily, but like
What?
just a general question, because we do this right in life. We go, okay, well, we'll get there someday. So,
Mhm.
but now I'm going to go to Scotland. But why not, if that's one of your must get to places on Earth? Why just? I mean, it's a stupid question, I guess. But why would that
No,
not be like
no,
a next?
that's a good question because this has been in my mind for probably the last 5 years, and if not longer. So if you flew there and did the whole tourist thing, it costs several thousands of dollars. I mean, it's you're like $8,000 or something. Say if you do an actual tour. So I would do the train and try to piecemeal it together myself. And one of the reasons that I maybe have been putting it off also is when you live in Minnesota, which is cold as snot, especially where I live. I mean, I live basically in the ice box of Minnesota, which is usually the ice box of the country, really. It's a lot of times the coldest place in America where I live. And to go north instead of south, sometimes, do I want to vacation somewhere where it's even colder or, you know,
Yeah. Yep.
so I mean that's a factor, but I'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Always great chatting with you. Love having you on. Maybe because your travels coming up maybe aren't as extensive, we'll definitely have you back. Hopefully, I'm still going in a year again or a
Yeah,
year
you will
plus,
be.
and we'll do it again sometime down the road. Is there anything that you'd like to close with before we actually hit stop on the recording?
You know, one of the thoughts that came to my head about Africa and maybe why it's so profound, especially when you tour it the way, the group I went with toured it, where you're staying in a tent and you feel like it's primal. And you realize that humans are just another animal, and we might be the smart animal, we might whatever, but to see how the ecological aspects of that where you would see I might be getting this wrong, but zebras and um the the warthogs, they call them Pumbaa, um and and gazelles and things, they're all hanging out together because one has really good ears, the other has really good sight, and then the Pumbas, they're the first ones to just run. So they're like really skittish. So if a puma runs, you'd better start paying attention. And so it's seeing that many animals, especially that many exotic animals and that number, it just makes you realize that you're just one of them. And we're really in their world. And we're sharing this world together.
Awesome, man. I love it. You're the best. Thank you so much for spending all of this time with me a second time around. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
good luck with everything. We'll be in
Yeah.
touch, obviously.
Yeah, it's great talking to you, Bill. I need to get to Pittsburgh one of these days.
Yeah, for sure. Or like I said, or we'll just fly out to Vietnam together.
Sounds good.
But yeah, Pittsburgh's a great town. I'd love to show you around. So
Yeah.
thanks again and take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. We'll talk to you later.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. It was another great guest with some great stories, as always. And I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whyvpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here and have a great day.